It's nice to hear your voice. Always.
Oh, thank you very much. How are you feeling? Because you've been sort of last couple of weeks you've been struggling, and I know the Negroni you had last week was curative. Did it knock it on the head, do you think? Are you back to fully
I've still got a little. You might hear it
form?
if you make me laugh too much. I've got the traces, the vestiges of that lung thing.
Oh, poor sausage. I will try really hard to talk only about sad things today, so there is no laughter. How's that?
That would be great. This is a podcast in which two friends talk about the pleasures, absurdities, and imperfections of being human. I'm Simon Ellis.
And I'm Lee Miller. Welcome to Midlifing.
I had a conversation with my boss the other day.
Okay.
It was interesting because the subject, this is going to be, you have to hang with me briefly because it's going to sound like I'm wanting to talk about work, but that's not what I want to talk about. But have you noticed recently that increasingly funding bodies are making decisions by lot?
By lot? What do you mean by lot?
They're basically choosing them by random. So people
yes. They've introduced
lottery.
a lottery system. Yeah, lottery. I see. I'm sorry. I was thinking like, when you said lot, I was thinking like an auction. Did people bid? Did they have a panel? They go,
I mean, that would be cool.
Come out.
Sold.
Yeah. Oh, brilliant. I just
bought
bought myself a
trousers.
research project. Okay, yes, by lottery. Yes, I have become aware of this as a strategy for sure.
Yes, and I think the idea is more or less. I'm just not going to use the acronym because it just winds me up so much. But it's basically the idea that people who in the past have, for various reasons, institutional racism, haven't had the same access to these pots of money. So it's a way of bypassing the potential for or the ravages of biases as part of selection processes in this perspective. How they give out money. So people apply. There's some kind of line in the sandwich that says yes, these applicants are all eligible, and then they just, given how much money they have, they pull them out of a hat, and those are the people that get the.
So before you carry on,
yeah.
I just want to say, I'm not sure that this does what they want it to do. Because you know that there has to be an internal process that allows a bid to go in first. Mm-hmm. So that would be the bit that you have to actually acknowledge that there might be a disparity of opportunity.
Yes, I think other things go on. Other things go on at all stages, which are about, for example, someone who's reading it might see who the people are and go, "Well, they're really good," and who they are becomes more important than for want of a better word, the content of the application. Yeah. So I imagine that's going all the time, and I just wanted to. Yeah. And part of this conversation with my boss was, well, if you get one of these grants, it's not like you can then put it on your CV as having won the grant. And so there's something about that it undermines a system that is, at least on face value, predicated on merit. And I'm curious about, because just to put it out there, I really love the idea. I think that I agree that it might not be dealing with the potential problem that you've just at the level at which it needs to be dealt with. But I really like the idea that really what we've been dealing with in the past is basically a lottery anyway, but just we haven't called it that.
Yeah.
And I'm curious I wanted to talk about the meritocracy, basically.
Okay, lovely. Well, I just want to be clear. I have no problem at all with the idea of a lottery. I think the idea of a lottery at the last stage as a way to increase equality and diversity initiatives, I won't use the acronym because it will make you cross, makes me go, well, that's neither going to increase equality or diversity, because there are people who will intervene into that narrative well in advance of it going into the pot to be selected, because there's the institutional landscape of support that would need to be addressed. And also then we've got to think about things like, well, let's say, for example, your institution, the area that you work in is research intensive. It has people who are pretty much focused only on research activity. Is that a fair representation, Simon? I don't want to misspeak.
Yep. Fair.
So if you were to compare your potential to put in bids against a teaching intensive institution where people are probably not getting much time in the course of their 9 to 5 to be able to do this. Exactly, if any. And even if they are able to then get a bid together, the question is, do they have the institutional support? Because remember, we've got full economic costing things to account for. It's like, oh, is this 100%? Is it 80%? If it's 80%, who's going to kick in that extra 20%? Does the institution want to support that kind of research in this moment? Is that the start? All of those kinds of conversations are being had before it goes into a pot. So I find myself going, I get the story that's being told, but I just want to go,
it's not the story.
It's not the story at all, because it's not a meritocracy, because research-intensive institutions are still going to yield higher results because they have more time to be able to put applications in, and they will continue to be more highly represented in funding opportunities or funding rounds. So it's a nonsense to me.
That means that, so we really are talking about work here, aren't we? That means that...
We are, but you were talking about it in the idea of meritocracy, and that if we're moving to a lottery, that makes it more even. It doesn't.
Well,
it simply shifts the selection process from one which is explicitly based upon opinion to one which is now implicitly based upon opinion.
So then we could make an argument that you keep lowering the bar. You keep lowering the bar to access, to make it so low so that all those discrepancies that you described between those that have more institutional support or more time, etc., are easily able to produce a document that is then goes in for a lottery.
Well, there is something here I'm going to try not to bridle. There is something here about the idea of you saying lowering the bar that makes me go, oh, there's an implication in what you said, even if not what you meant, that those research intensives are already firing on better cylinders rather than they just have more fuel.
It's not what it isn't what I meant,
would
actually.
Humbly suggest, having met researchers at both institutions, that having more time and more opportunity sure as shit doesn't make you better at what you do. Would be my humble observation.
Wow.
Well, I think it's... No. I think we are working in a deeply hierarchical system where, in the UK, for those of you who are outside of the UK, there is something called the Russell Group, which is a self-selected group of universities that have decided they are better than everybody else. Self-selected.
It's hilarious. It's hilarious, isn't it? That it even exists is just so indicative of...
Yeah, exactly. The class system. It's the class system played out in a variety of ways, and it will attract more children from private schooling. All of those sorts of things apply. So it is absolutely the class
anything
system
else
in the UK played
any
out.
other narratives of papering over the cracks of that particular.
Yeah. And there used to be some really wonderful initiatives that were governmentally funded pre-austerity around widening participation, which actually did some incredible work at a grassroots level to increase the opportunities for students from, let's call them, non-traditional backgrounds,
like women,
which I believe is the. Well, I was just thinking about the euphemism that when we say non-traditional, what that usually means is lower socioeconomic backgrounds, and families who selecting families who have never had anybody who's gone to university.
Yeah.
Those kinds of approaches, and they used to be really, really good really, really good opportunities, but since austerity measures were brought in much the same way that LGBTQIA plus safe spaces have been reduced, in much the same way that Sure Start opportunities that would bring kids out of poverty have been reduced. All of this
libraries, basically libraries were the only quiet spaces in major cities that people can go where there's not a massive amount of noise.
Yep, have been closed or turned into effectively creches, which I have no problem with. I said crash, but creche.
Yeah.
I'm northern. See, I learn by reading, not by hearing. So I think you start to pick at a scab on my psyche that goes really, really deep. Really deep, because I have spent, and let's be really clear, I know that I am a professor in a university who has successfully secured funding.
I forgot you were a professor. Fuck it. I'd forgot it for a while. I'd just forgotten that you were a professor.
I'm so sorry. But I've secured money from Research Council, so I know that I am speaking here from a position of absolute privilege. So, all of the things that I am railing against don't necessarily apply to my lived experience. It's that idea of kind of meritocracy. It starts to disappear, and I know you didn't mean if we lower the bar. You didn't mean what you said, but it just it pushes all my buttons.
Okay, so why don't I just push it a little bit then? I don't mean in the sense to be an asshole, but see next week's episode. Let's whatever it is, that there's something about making it more accessible to people, making the process so that the hurdles, there are fewer hurdles, and the hurdles that exist are lower. Right, I don't know how else to describe that thing, and without making you bridle,
I think perhaps if we were to just reframe it and not say lower, because that suggests that I'm implicitly advocating for lower quality outputs, which is not what I would be saying. What I'm talking about here is if we can somehow create a system which acknowledges the disparities.
I mean, I'm so for this. Like I think I couldn't feel stronger about a thing that someone like Barack Obama. I mean, he really, and the same with Tony Blair. Although I'm not quite so familiar with his politics in a way, but Barack Obama. I mean, he still sings the praises. The idea of the meritocracy in the United States is incredibly strong. This idea that we should all have the same opportunity, and then a society that's based on merit. That is, that person does better at this thing, gets their just desserts, right? It's a very, very, the sort of striation, or that ideology runs very deep. And I suspect it runs pretty deep in the UK, although because of, as you've just sort of hinted at, the way in which the class system works in the UK, and just how front and centre the class system is, probably might make people talking about meritocracies bridle a little bit. But even within that class structure, I think you get this very strong idea that the cream rises to the top.
I mean, that's certainly a story that's been told, and I think that's why in '97 Tony Blair came in on a mandate of education. But I think I've said before that all that did was it funneled people who shouldn't be going to universities into universities. It devalued a university experience, and more importantly for me is it hugely devalued apprenticeships and on-job training, and it required people to have degrees in things that you don't need a degree in, that you actually should have other kinds of training. And I'm all for a broad approach to secondary and tertiary education that doesn't just look like one thing. But not long after that, we moved to a fee structure, and so it turned universities into businesses. So I don't agree with the idea of this being something about meritocracy. Also, because Tony Blair was a privately educated by Tory parents, and effectively a Tory by any other name. just because he rebranded a party. Don't get me wrong. In '97, I totally voted for him because I was well excited, and I drank I drank the Kool-Aid. I believed in the narrative.
You drank the Tony
it just
Blair
turned out,
martinis.
Yeah.
Wow. But you do, in what I heard you say, or maybe this is just me kind of hanging on to that, or it's revealing my kind of biases, which is that universities, I think I heard you imply or suggest that they ought not to be for everyone.
Absolutely.
Yeah. God, that's interesting.
And I don't mean that everybody shouldn't have the opportunity to go to it who wants to. I do believe that. What I don't believe they should do is try to do everything for everyone. If that makes sense as a distinction. And I'm bothered about the fact that it feels like the only thing that somebody who finishes secondary education is able to do in terms of developing their skill set is to go to a university.
Their idea, their sort of self-worth as well as...
Yeah, well, absolutely. Yeah, totally tied up in that. And I think that that's possibly what the whole education did, is it modelled education on his experience of education. And I think he went to Westminster and,
He didn't study drama, did he?
No, he didn't. But he went to Oxford or Cambridge. He went to one of those, and so he had that understanding that universities and education looks a particular way.
And also, it would have worked for him in a very particular way, as it worked for me. I mean, no question for me. The university worked for me as an undergraduate.
No, absolutely, and no question that it worked for me either. I'm not trying to... What I want to be really clear is I'm not trying to pull the ladder up from behind me. I'm not saying you're not allowed in. But what I'm saying is that I want there to be more opportunities for people that are not as singular as the opportunities as they currently are, because there are many people who get to university and then don't enjoy the experience or don't succeed, and I don't think that does a particularly good job of their self-worth.
Yeah. So there's still a sense, though, that if universities are not for everyone, there's at some point someone has to make a decision about whether this person is, let's say, I don't know what the word is, the best person out of a group of people to go to this institution. And that somewhere, and that another person is probably better for this kind of place. And I'm not trying to separate out as being one necessarily being better, because somehow kind of an objective way. But let's say just more appropriate for one person over another person. That the kind of skills, the kind of interests of a particular person means that they should go and do an apprenticeship somewhere else. And this other person might be a total maths geek, and the only place where those kinds of abstractions are dealt with in any meaningful way for a person like that is at university, for example. And so someone at somewhere along the line is making those decisions. Yes, no, yes, no.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And how do we deal with that?
Oh, we need to do a root and branch rethink of what education is. We need to put education at the forefront of governmental narratives, alongside of health. Those are two things that should be,
hand in hand.
We should defund the police, and by that I don't mean we should shutter them. I think what I mean is that we should do what the guy in, I want to say, it's either Somerset or Norfolk. It's somewhere that has a large coastal and rural population, but effectively the chief chief inspector or whatever they call them.
Yeah, I don't know. Head of police,
superintendent. The boss person,
the local constable. No, the local head of the constables.
Yeah. The local police boss has said, okay, so I'm going to take some of my money, some of my budget, and I'm going to give it to frontline mental health services. That's defunding the police. That's not saying the police don't deserve money. It's saying that, much like a university, the police can't do everything. They can't deal with people with severe mental health issues. But they're the people who are dealing with people with severe mental health issues, because there is no decent mental health service in the UK. So what happens is somebody has an episode of mental ill health, and the police are called for because they are the only people who are available.
I mean,
And
I completely agree. But as I think we might have said before, or I've definitely said it, defund the police was possibly the worst bit of branding ever in the history of the political left. Truly asinine and bizarre. Like,
no, and I went on to qualify it by saying that when I say that, I'm talking about a reattribution of funding across public sector. Also, I would, I'd do a lot of stuff about pulling things back into under governmental purse strings rather than, exactly. I would get rid of all sense of privatization of any stripe in the idea of farming things out. It just really bothers me. Really, it's hard not to start to feel prickly and hot and cross because we see Rishi Sunak's wife benefiting to the tune of millions as a result of policies that he's put in place. It's not even. It's the greed is so naked now as to be. It's the new normal. It's the new normal, and it's all tied up with this idea of meritocracy because meritocracy, and I know we're going. This comes to a very particular conversation about funding in a university context.
Yeah, again, I was trying to make it. I didn't really want to make it about funding in universities because it's not, it's not particularly interesting. But just this question of merit.
But it does become a microcosm of the larger problem because if we think about teaching-intensive universities that don't have the opportunity to be able to put the work in, to put in an application that then gets into the lottery, and all of the research intensives can do that, it's not a meritocracy when it gets to a lottery.
Sure.
And we have multiple versions of that played out across, in education.
From a very young age.
From a very young age. And also access to healthcare from a very young age. So that's what I'm following your meritocracy, but going back to your conversation about meritocracy and not about work, but sort of tracking it back to the particular example that you give feels to me, that's where the flaw is that we've got to keep going back and back and back and back and back to try and find where the root of the issue is. And I really like the fact that people are trying. Don't get me wrong. I sounded so cross and grumpy. I like the idea that people are trying.
Years ago I read a book by Michael Sandel called The Tyranny of Merit. And mostly the book focuses on access on the, what do they call it, the system in the United States of people getting into universities. I forget there's a particular word they use for it. And, it's not entirely focused on that, but it has a pretty good go at that. And it's such a beautiful title. I think gives a TED talk about it, which is very worth your while listening to, or watching, whatever. But I remember talking to Finn. This is my nephew Finn about it, and it was interesting. As a young man, he was. I think it's fair to say, I think he was shocked by the idea that things didn't happen as a consequence of getting better at something. Meaning, if he put more hours in as a football player, he would get better at that, and then he would be that work would pay off for him in a way that was better than those people who had done less work. And I think as soon as you start chipping away at that idea, or you start kind of going, well, hang on, but what kinds of advantages have you had that other people didn't have? I mean, let's say you had an uncle that has a master's degree in physical education and has done sports psychology and all sorts of stuff, right? Which were fully being loaded into his kind of preparation and his training. Yeah. And so it's really it's so destabilizing for. I think I don't really want to put words into his mouth, but I remember him being shocked by it. That is that this wasn't a level playing field. And when you start recognizing just how unlevel that playing field is, you go, whoa, hang on, where the hell do I stand on this idea? And it's an idea that I hold very dearly. I really do. That if I work harder and get better at something, then I get something as a consequence of that. And that I've, as we've talked about before, earned that. it's really, really insidious if you start chipping away at that kind of thinking and the power and the importance of that kind of thinking. And so I'm so deeply kind of uncertain about this, although I feel pretty strongly that the idea of the meritocracy is just a total have. I just want to try and somehow account for the importance of being able to say that someone is better at someone else at doing something, and and that matters. But how to reconcile that? But because we have different aptitudes, and so there's something about that. And in a sport it's one of the things about sport, which is not all sports, but most sports. It's really clear that this team was better than this team on that day. Because they have a way of measuring that through goals scored or whatever. But even then, that's a bit tricky. But yeah, so how do we account for quality? For want of a better word, it's a really tricky